This is Joel's third visit to Longwood. Many, many years ago, or not so many years ago, but when he first came, I introduced him. I got a few laughs from the crowd because I told them that what he told me, that he'd come to poetry via Elvis. He wanted to sound like the king in his poems, and in his first book or so, he really did. I mean, he's very expansive and very lyric, and just incredible. Then in early February 2004, Joel and his first wife, Susan, who was herself a rising star in the poetry circuit, and their young sons, Cyrus and Darius, were involved in a horrific accident in Jordan. They were down there on a Fulbright. The minivan that Joel and his family were being chauffeured in was struck or hit by a sand truck in the middle of the desert. Susie and Cyrus were killed. Darius suffered a broken leg, and Joel was broken a lot more severely, both physically and in many less tangible ways, and his recovery was long and agonizing, but he made it. And when he returned to writing, he still sang, but his voice was different. He often wrote in prose. He began to write creative nonfiction, memoiristic. Is there such a word as memoiristic? I'm not sure, but memoir-esque essays. They appeared in really important venues like River Teeth and North American Review, and since then he has published a whole volume of those. It's called Resisting Elegy. It's a very, very moving book. Which brings us to tonight. You're going to hear both poetry and prose from Joel, and even though his voice is still in the process of changing, and it's not for nothing, I think, that his next book of poetry, which came out just a few months ago, a little chapbook called Why Not Take All of Me? It's about, as it says here, a cycle of poems on the life and music of Billie Holiday. He's a music aficionado of many different kinds of genres of music. He loves Billie Holiday. And here's just a sample. It's a real brief excerpt from this, a part of a poem called Billie Gets Strange, with the epigraph from the famous the song Strange Fruit that she made so popular. Black bodies hanging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. And here's the excerpt. And yet that fool who asked her, sing that song again, that sexy one about the naked bodies in the trees, had a point. She sang, uncanny, like a cold sweat casting into swamps, like fever, and didn't turn away and didn't turn us on to agony. She made us deal with just how sick we were and are. Body is fruit, something to be swallowed down, consumed, savored for the juice, a musk that made it real. Well, I think you're going to be very, very thrilled to hear Joel tonight. He also has just come out with a new book, also from the same publisher, Future Cycle, called God's Bicycle. And in it, he sings again, and you're going to hear some of that music. So without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Joel Peckham.
So Rachel did all the thank yous. I guess I can do that again. It's very, very kind of Craig to ask us here and to ask us to read together, because I really enjoy teaming up with Rachel, because then I can embarrass her publicly, which is great. So I am actually going to read a poem. I'm going to start with a poem. If you're married to another writer, or if you're dating another writer, you have to prepare yourself for the moment when your writer partner turns to you and says, "How come you never write about me?" It's a loaded question. And Rachel did that once, and I said, "What are you talking about? I write about you all the time. What about all those love poems?" And she goes, "All of those love poems are about you." And I had nothing. What do you say? This next poem, it actually begins with a short epigraph from Robert Johnson's Love in Vain, and I'm going to actually try to sing that. Here we go. When the train left the station, it had 2 lights on behind. When the train left the station, It had two lights on behind. The red light was my baby, and the blue light was my mind. You tell me all my love poems are about myself. They are. Of course they are. The way a stomach clenches on itself, hungry as a half-starved wolf, and burns. When I'm miles from home and low on cash, and the gas tank swallows fuel at almost $4 a gallon, I swallow down the miles. Listening to Graham and Emmy Lou, and even the light tastes like wind in an empty bowl. All along Route 52, the train chases evening into haze of field smoke, and it is steel and iron and bitter. I want you, I want you, I want to breathe you in and sweat you out like fever. If I said I see the curving of your back, your taut skin, stretch of stomach and breast rise with grasses blown down by passing trucks or trains that raise again to back roads and the swaying hips of hills, would you say still, this is about you? Like everything longed for is about the one who wants. But say that every crop and wind sings back your name. Say the farmhouse leaning into itself from years of rot and rain calls back the story of your father when he took a rifle to the barns to shoot a hog. He had to, you said. She was sick. But that wasn't the point. It never is. The things we have to do, we have to pay for. I imagine him walking across the yard, throwing the gun into the truck, swinging himself up and in. She understands, he thinks, and hates himself. And so it is about him too. And every stoplight in the city of Portsmouth, every other car that can't move fast enough through roadwork, merging lanes and intersections. It is about love, which is always about the wanting. That space between Adam's fingers and the hand of God that might as well be 190 miles of road is more, is all the roads that bend through mountains, and how like water, lovers seek the hollows and the shallows. How your mouth fills my mouth, your breast the empty cup of my hand. How bodies fit and fill and form to one another over time, but not just that. The way an image fills the mind, the chest, and lungs. You curled in sleep at 5 a.m. You reading to our boy at night, his arm across your chest. You at 14 painting a fence on your father's farm, white smear on a calf that rises up and into cut-off jeans. You at 7 spinning and dancing until delirious you fall against the hearth. The quarter moon of scar left by your right eye that pulls me now through fields and hills, grunting and sniffing at the air, a thirst, a hunger worth starving for, this specific, holy wanting that is you. Craig saved me a little bit of the introduction. To what I'm going to do next. I was going to tell you about the accident and what happened and all of that, and thankfully he did that for me. What I'm going to read from you is not from that book. I like to say I wrote that book in self-defense. I was trying to get through a very difficult time. And I tell students that writer's block, a definition for writer's block, is when you're writing about the thing that's not going on in your head, when you're trying to write about something else. So I went through this period where that was all I could write about for a while, and then I looked up and I had a book. And then I thought, why would anybody want to read this book? A few people have, thankfully, and if you want it, I can sell you a copy. And then I thought I was done. I am done with this. And then I ended up writing another piece on it, which is called Swimming. Growing up, I was afraid of water, terrified, not of just you give me a glass of water, I'm fine, but swimming in it was terrifying. And the thing was, I went to a summer camp. My father was the athletic director of a summer camp with this enormous lake, and my mother was the water skiing director, and I was terrified of water. So Steve asked me, was there something that happened? And I was thinking, well, actually, kind of, yeah. The waterfront director was an ex-Navy SEAL, and he taught me rhythmic breathing by grabbing the back of my hair, shoving my face in the water, and shouting, "Breathe, breathe, breathe." I think I was 12 when I learned to swim. Ironically, after the accident, because of the injury that I suffered, the femoral head went through with my acetabular socket, which is like the hardest bone in the body to break, and just shattered it. Part of my recovery was swimming. I had to swim. I get in the water with this enormous snorkel and goggles and a face mask, with all these old people around me doing water aerobics. But so I wrote this essay called Swimming, which is really about sort of dealing with grief and facing the terror of living your life, which is a different kind of terror than the grief. So this is a braided essay which deals with the swimming and deals with the grief, and I'm going to read you parts of it. Hopefully it hangs together, but you have enough context. That's plenty of context. If it doesn't survive now, the essay is no good anyway. A few times every summer, Camp Manitou would have an island swim, in which campers could breaststroke, crawl, and dog paddle the half-mile to Birch Island and back again. This was in the early 80s, before fears of litigation halted so many dangerous camp traditions. I often think about how insulated my own son's life has become in comparison. When I was a kid, we didn't wear helmets when we rode bikes. We played touch football games with bone-crushing fervor. We sledded down suburban hills and stationed lookouts in the road at the bottom to watch for cars. We played street hockey, literally, in the middle of the street. I think we accepted danger as a natural part of our lives back then, or perhaps we simply didn't want to face the reality of danger. Of course, at Manitou, there were attempts to keep the campers safe. Counselors would paddle out in canoes and kayaks to protect the swimmers from errant ski and fishing boats, pulling boys out if they looked exhausted. But with as many as 50 boys swimming at the same time in dark, murky water, as deep as 27 feet in some places, there was no guarantee of safety. The swimmers' abilities varied. Not everyone even made it out to the island, never mind the return trip, and pulling an exhausted, weeping 14-year-old into a canoe could often result in both man and boy holding on to an overturned boat while waiting for help. "We've got 3 more floaters," the waterfront director would broadcast on his bullhorn, and the whaler would lurch out after them, slowly picking its way through the boys, trying not to swamp them in its wake. Even crazier than the event itself was the fact that so many of us signed up for it. Other than an achievement patch and certificate, there was no reward for having finished the swim. But most kids aren't afraid of drowning. They can't imagine death at all, can't imagine not being, because for a boy, the world does not exist without him in it. The camp itself came into being only when we stepped off the bus in June, and though we had changed over 9 months of school, accumulating zits and hair in private places, having our first wet dream and maybe even our first kiss, the camp magically stayed the same. From the shore, the island, like the moon on a clear night, seems closer than it is, as if you could reach a hand out and touch the egret's nest tilting in the highest tree. It's not that far, you tell yourself. I can make it easily. But then you swim 200 yards and your arms start to hurt and your back. You switch strokes and begin to feel it in your abdominals and neck. Muscles you don't use on the ball field begin to ache and cramp, and that island just looms out there. You stop believing there is an end to all this water. You pick your head up after 300 yards, and some asshole guitar instructor says from his kayak, "Come on, Joel, only like 1,000 more yards to go." I remember sitting on the rocks of the island with my best friend Neil, staring at the boys spread out all over the lake, some paddling toward us and some back toward the beaches and the cabins. "That," Neil said, laughing, "is a long fucking swim." What am I afraid of? Well, there's swimming. I don't like heights much either. I'm terrified of driving at night, and of course, there's what might happen, the what-ifs. Darius does not ride his bike without his helmet, and then only as far as my eyes can follow him from the front steps of our house. And he goes sledding only at the park, with me watching. I've gotten remarried to Rachel, a beautiful, kind woman who tries each day to pull me into the future with her, rubbing the pain out of my legs, encouraging me to write, to live. But when she's late coming home from a night class, when she gets angry with me and storms out for a walk, I sweat. I gasp for air. Sometimes I fear the past, the memory of those moments when I felt lost, when I wanted to take all the Percocet in the bottle by the bed and simply float off. I know those times could come again. There is no exemption from trouble for any of us. But that's not the greatest fear. Death is not the greatest fear. Neither is loss. Living is a long fucking swim. Summary of the drowning process. Panic and violent struggle to return to surface. Period of calmness. Swallowing of fluid followed by vomiting. Terminal gasp. Unconsciousness. Possible seizures. Death. 32. It's a different section, leaping ahead. I don't want to get better, the woman said, gasping, alternating between defiance, her hands clawing the air or squeezing what flesh there was around her bony knees, and a deflated calm. The Compassionate Friends bereavement group met in a small reading room at the back of St. Mary's Catholic Church once a month. I was relatively new. It had only been a little over a month since the accident. My youngest sister, Tina, would help me out of bed, belt me into the car, and drive me out there, then sit with me as we listened to the stories of other parents who had lost children. Tina thought that it would be therapeutic, and in a way it was. The first time it was my turn to speak was the first time I had told this story. It was the first time I had been able to speak of it at all. But in this moment, even as I drifted in and out of the fog of narcotics, this frantic woman's words reached me, stung me awake. Why do I have to get better? For who? Oh, sure, for the first few months, everyone was willing to listen, but then it was like, okay, it's time to get on with it. Back to your life. What life? The other parents in the bereavement group nodded supportively. Some leaned into the words as if walking against a strong wind. Some settled back into metal chairs, arms crossed, staring up at the ceiling or at the crucifixes on the walls. I remember one man who never said anything, just moved his lips, silently mouthing the prayers and psalms that hung everywhere. A young couple who had lost a baby to cancer grasped each other's hands as if at any moment one of them might lose their grip and be pulled out of the room and down the hall into the night. My sister rubbed the back of my neck. The woman went on talking. As best as I can remember, this is what she said. My husband used to come here with me, hold my hand. She pointed to the chair next to her, where she had placed a flowered pocketbook as if reserving the seat. But even he is done with it. We have to move on, he says. Let go, he says. I tell him he's not living either. He's just pretending, just going through the motions. He says, you go through the motions long enough, maybe you can start remembering how to live. Maybe it becomes living. But it doesn't work that way. Or maybe it does for other people, but for me, there's no getting past it or through it. It's everywhere. He's everywhere. Except he isn't. Her son was 18. She awoke in the middle of the night to strange sounds from the den, like a cat coughing up a hairball. But they didn't own a cat. And there was a shuddering sound. She got her husband up and they crept in. When they found the boy, he was already having convulsions, frothing at the mouth. So it's been 10 years, she said at the meeting. So what? Every day you wake up and nothing changes. His room's still empty. He's still dead. Family, friends, they act disgusted, like it's indecent to grieve your own child for too long. After all, he was an addict, right? But everyone's an addict, addicted to something. He was my boy, and people act like there's a stopwatch or an hourglass, and you only have so much time. They tell you it's all part of God's plan. That's indecent. She stared hard at the priest who mediated the group. I'm sorry, but it's true. And one day becomes another, and each day it's like you move further away. It's like you were walking together with someone on a path, and he's stopped walking, and you want to go back, but you can't. You just keep moving away, and it goes on like that until he's so far back you can't even see him anymore. Can't remember his face without looking at a picture. Can't hear his face in your head. I should be a grandmother by now. You know what's indecent? Expecting me to get out of bed, make breakfast, and act like everything is normal. Like I never had a son at all. 33. I think about Susan and Cyrus all the time. Many people who suffer from physical or emotional pain or both spend much of their lives wishing to return to normal. As if it were this magical place they could get back to with a click of their heels if only God weren't so cruel. Many become addicted to pills or doctors or new treatments. Normalcy, when understood as some sort of cultural norm, is almost always destructive. Not only does it delegitimize experiences and people who exist outside the norm and label much of what we don't understand as deviant, it sets up a standard profile that no one fits. The only useful concept of normal is an individual one. If you can find your normal and can live within it, that's recovery. My normal? There is the physical. Right now, my right leg itches from just below the knee to about halfway down to the toes. It used to burn, though what sufferers of neuropathy call burning is not quite the burn you feel when you place your hand on a hot stove. In my case, it felt as if the blood were made of minute shards of glass. In the 7 years since the accident, that burning has become a constant itch. When I can't sleep, when I get tired, when I'm weakened by sickness or sadness or stress, I'll start to claw at it. Of course, you can't scratch an itch like this. You'd have to scratch the nerve itself. But I scratch anyway until my toes bleed and the phantom pain becomes a real one, something for my wife to worry over, rubbing ointments into the skin, scolding me. But most days, I just deal with it. It's my normal. My foot itches, and sometimes I recognize that it does only because the other one doesn't. The trick is getting over the wish to have the right leg feel like the left, or to not feel it at all. And once you can get your mind around the fact that your normal might not ever change, you can almost deal with it. The emotional normal is harder to write about, because I have no point of reference any longer. It's hard to remember or even imagine, and isn't all memory really an act of imagination? What it was like not to be the way I am. This is the last section. In the dream, I am swimming toward the island. It is night, and the stars are reflected on the water. I am not frightened. Each stroke is smooth and practiced, and I move as if I were born to do it, as if I were flying. I am not cold, though a thin mist rises. The cry of a loon does not begin or end, but always is and echoes everywhere. And somewhere out in front of me, I know he's there. A pale and glistening body bobbing in the distance. I cannot tell if he can see me. He does not wave or call. I cannot reach him. I will not hold his hand. I am not meant to. I know this. And somehow I also know that I will never reach the island, but will cross an endless chain of lakes, drawn after him and out from him like a shaft of light toward the looming moon. I take in all the air my lungs will hold, turn my face down into darkness, breathe out, and I swim. Craig actually read most of the Billie Holiday poem I was going to read, which is cool, because then I don't have to read it. So I'm going to read 2 more poems, and then we're going to call it a night. What do you think? All right, because I want to go out and get a drink. I had to learn when I was a much younger writer that drinking 4 bourbons before a reading was not a good idea. That was I guess, my James Dickey, Dylan Thomas phase or some idiocy like that. This is called Psalm 96. I wrote this. I used to teach at a community college in Ohio, and I wrote this for my students. Sing to the Lord a new song, of men and women riding the last bus home through quarries and yellowing tobacco fields of Highway 421. Sing the long sigh and slow grind of axles and tired eyes that watch through glass the memory of Guthrie and Bluff Hills and the Greenback Labor Party that never had a chance to. Sing of strong arms and backs that broke in heat and boys and girls who'd grow barefoot through stones and stagnant water and bellies swole with hunger. Sing malaria, pellagra, and the scars that faded and the scars that didn't. Sing a new song from the old, the way things work their way like hookworm up in through cracks in the skin. Sing their descendants up from the dust to work in Michigan auto plants and down to dust again in mines of West Virginia. Sing cornbread and potatoes. Sing food stamps and long lines and the water shut-off notice on the door. Sing thirst and stink and the boys signed up to fight through mustard gas and jungle, the beaches of Europe and the Philippines, the deserts of the Middle East. Sing of IEDs and what freedom really means to empty bellies and an anger at everything. Sing of sand, how it gets everywhere. Hair, the pits of your arms, groin, grinding away the skin like hunger gets everywhere. How sometimes the only thing to put in an empty hand is another hand. Sing anger and lust and football on cold Friday nights that crush of bodies on bodies. Sing full contact and sex and muscle cars on backcountry roads and in the basements and parking lots. Sing of children and more children. 99-cent burgers and cold fries and grease that fills them. Sing the grease that makes the stomach clamp. And single mothers who learned from their mothers who men were gone before they were gone, even when they were there. Sing cosmetology school, beauty school, and the community college down the road because you're 50 years old and still trying, still singing. Man gone, kids trying to be gone, and you stealing hours on the nursing home computer where you work wiping asses and cleaning bedpans so you can take a night class on gender issues. So you can learn words like patriarchy, hegemony, abject, subaltern. Sing the privilege you're supposed to have. Sing the Spirit. Sing to the Lord because the Lord is hope that maybe a new song can rise green and leafy from a bitter soil. Sing because it's all you have. This life bound up in other lives before you that matter because you say they do. You say you do because you sing. Last one. God's bicycle. So I lived in Batavia for a while and saw some interesting things living in Batavia, driving back and forth, sitting basically on Route 32 waiting for the traffic to clear. So this is the last poem in the book, and whenever I do a reading, it's the last thing I read because I like how it ends. And this is God's bicycle. God is pedaling a bicycle down Highway 32, traveling west toward Cincinnati against traffic, of course. The bicycle is red, one of the sit-down, lay-back types with 3 wheels and a basket on the front filled with groceries. Local eggs, milk, cheese, some bacon. He hasn't been kosher in years. A Bengals pennant blows from the back. Who knew? He looks much like you'd expect. A fat, elderly white guy with a soot-stained beard and the slightly crazed and haggard look of the father of many, many children. When the children figure out he loves them and that really there is little he can do. A timeout here, a spanking there. Even if the burning pit is real, he will not drop them. So they fight and bicker, pull at his ears, laugh at shouts and idle threats, beat the dog, masturbate on the toilet, in the closet, in the basement, on his favorite couch when he's at work, and leave the stains for him to clean. Saying, "I know what you've been up to, I'm everywhere," does nothing, since the Puritans, but make them exhibitionists, hypocrites, at best, voyeurs. And what did all that watching do to him at last but make his eyes sore? So he leans back in his pajama pants and flannels, pedaling his bicycle. His chin raised skyward so he can't see into the windows, can't meet the hungry stares. And it is a miracle how he avoids collisions, mostly, and keeps the world in orbit. There is enough to do. Get out of the way, you crazy old... Switching gears from high to low, muttering as he goes, "I love you all. I love you. I love you. I love you all. I love you." Thank you.